Hello, and welcome to the Open Source Hangout podcast, where we discuss the development of open source software. Today, we're joined by the people who stuck through the technical issues we had in the pre-show so that we could actually still have a podcast this week. And it's live streamed today on July 23rd at 9 p.m. Central Time. I'm your host, Sean Massa. I'm a software engineer at Groupon, and this week's co-host is Aaron Bedra.
Hello.
Hey. We have a couple of news items this week that we wanted to talk about. One that I thought was really interesting. We hear this off and on in different countries that the UK finally makes the ODF its official document format, which is interesting to keep hearing about a lot of countries in the EU specifically, but switching over to Linux or LibreOffice or some combination of those things, or some of them using Chromebooks, and this is just yet another standard in that setup. So what do you think about this, Aaron? It's pretty cool.
Agreed. I love to see this kind of stuff happening. It's as a person who has only, really had the Microsoft Office suite installed when it was absolutely necessary. It's nice to be able to have some of these other formats. The Microsoft tools are great, but forcing it on everybody is sometimes tough when you want to collaborate across different environments. This is nice, not only that it makes it a more open standard, but also tools that are approachable by anybody for no real fee.
Yeah, definitely. These decisions always make sure that they say like how much money they're saving, and I think that's a useful point, but also sometimes maybe a little misleading because they don't say like how much money they're spending on training people on using the new whatever. Like here is just a document format, which may not involve a lot of training, but may involve a lot of conversions, like what's the transition, how much overhead is that causing. But overall, yeah. I think it's pretty cool.
There's a lot of hidden costs there.
Yeah. I think that Microsoft at least tried to make this easier by creating a standard for the new formats and creators for their formats, but it's a little too late.
I think so, yeah.
All right, so the next item we wanted to talk about is this thing about, the EFF wants to build this open wireless router.
I am so excited about this.
So tell us why this is awesome.
Well, it's exciting for a lot of different reasons, right? The security person in me is excited because, it allows you to have a wireless router that you really can look through and figure out what's going on, right? The stuff you buy on the shelves is a lot of proprietary code, and I mean, yeah, you could take it apart and do all kinds of crazy things to it to figure out what's going on, but you still never really know. Open source, hardware, open source software, the whole deal, that's really great. You have an auditable stack. So as kind of security person / geek, that really excites me. Also, I really like making hardware and doing the hardware hacking stuff. My ErgoDocs kit comes in the mail tomorrow.
Yes.
So I'm happy to do my open source keyboard pretty soon. But that stuff is really great. I just love the entire idea of being able to build your own stuff from scratch.
Yeah, it's really exciting that the open source movement's moving into hardware with more force recently as well, just in general. All right, so let's get on to the main discussion topic this week, which is getting started with open source contribution. So the thing we want to talk about is sort of two parts. One is as a new developer to open source, maybe not a new developer in general, how do you approach getting into open source contributions? Sometimes it can be kind of daunting, especially if you want, like maybe you want to contribute to Firefox itself. Like, where do you even begin? But it can also be true of smaller projects. So we want to approach it from that side, but we also want to approach it from the side as an open source project maintainer, big or small. How do you make your project more appealing to new contributions? And stuff like that. So we want to start by not necessarily defining open source, but talking a little bit about the open source contributions. Um, one of one of the things that people always think about is that you are committing code. Like code is the core of an open source project, but it's not the only thing you can do. So I think it's important that we note that like helping to write good documentation is a way you can contribute in lots of others. Uh, but yeah, it's important to know. I think we'll go through a bunch of them. But does anyone want to start off? I think maybe the first thing we should tackle is, as a new developer, how do you like find a good project? What are you looking for? What are red flags? What are good things to note? Stuff like that. So any thoughts on?
There was definitely, one thing that got me started was just working with a tool that I used on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Finding something that I really enjoyed using. Um, and for me, actually, that was back in the late '90s with Nmap, um, and then kind of in the early 2000s, I guess, for real, started contributing to it when I was in college. Um, that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about how to write software. Actually, I was learning how to be a programmer, I guess, in computer science classes, but not really how to make software. And that taught me a lot more about packaging and distribution and community and all kinds of interesting stuff. And I learned a lot more about C and C++ than I was learning in college. So it actually helped supplement my education in the process. But I just found a tool I like to use, and I went with it. Of course, there are much different ways to approach it, but that was really kind of a nice step for me. Was just finding something I was interested in and like to use.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to approach it because it's the same with personal projects. If you want to learn something, like you want to learn how to use C++, going through a random tutorial is fine, but if you don't have a goal or something, you're not really going to internalize it. You're just going to do the tutorial and have some slight bit more context of what that thing is. If you have a goal, and just like with open source, if you have a project you use and you identify some small thing you want to change about it, that's going to motivate you much more. It's important. Um, anyone else have any thoughts on finding, like, how does this new developer find a new project or an existing open source project to contribute to?
I'll jump in. I'm Dusty Burwell, by the way, also of Groupon, as is Sean and Aaron. I guess kind of my experience has mostly been in starting my own thing rather than jumping into something that exists. And I mean, that's a totally different way to enter into an open source engagement. Um, like just any old crappy code uploading just any little project that I'm working on. But then also, your favorite repository of Jennifer Lawrence gifs is a good place to start.
Yeah, for sure. But what do you, so yeah, I definitely want to talk more about like when you're open sourcing your own project and how you deal with that in a bit. But
Sure,
what are,
absolutely.
what are the types of things that people look for? Like one of the things I like to look for is that the README is really clear and that it has like, really clean install steps, like some, hopefully just one step other than creating the repository, but like how do I get set up even messing with this stuff? What other things are you looking for like that?
So usually people view open source as a bit of a daunting task, but my how I started and how I usually start contributing to projects is I'm using like a library for some projects, and I go check the GitHub page, and I go through the README, and usually there's like a typo or two, and that's where I start. Just make a really small pull request for a single typo, and then I read the rest of the documentation. If I have a problem with the library, I try to research it a bit and open an issue. If it's something trivial that I can grab hold of, then I try to work with the library maintainers to see if it's something that I can work on or if they want to do it themselves, because uh, sometimes, but I think we should discuss this later, but sometimes as a library offer, you get pull requests that that don't coincide with your vision. So I think it's important to actually speak to the library maintainers too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that a few people would argue that GitHub is sort of the core of the more recent open source movement. There are other sites like SourceForge, Google Code, Bitbucket, but it really seems like most projects are on GitHub, unless they're pretty big, they're probably on there are others. But
I think
Actually,
that highlights. I'm sorry.
go ahead. Sorry.
I think that highlights kind of what the most important thing about open source is that it's honestly the community. So like having the GitHub issues or discussions on there, or having the IRC or the mailing list, like whatever it is, needs to be there, and it needs to be easily, it needs to be like one of the first things you see. Like the README should tell you about it, because like the ability to go in and see like I'm going to get along with these people, I can have a meaningful conversation about the future of this project with these people is kind of the biggest barrier to entry. If you just come into it and have no idea what's going on, and it doesn't seem very active because you have no one to communicate to, then even if you do a pull request, chances are it's not going to get merged in.
yeah, for sure. Let's take a minute. We have a handful of people on this discussion, so let's take a minute and have people introduce themselves. Dusty, Aaron, and I already did that, but Megan, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. So I'm Megan, Megan Waller. I work at A-Flight in Chicago.
And Mike? Maybe you're muted, Mike.
I should unmute myself. Hi, I'm Mike. I work with a company called CoderWall. Actually, for assembly is the company that owns CoderWall, but we're doing open source development in a little different way, where it's getting ownership. People who contribute get ownership. So I've been just I forgot what I was gonna say. I'll just let it go.
Ricardo?
Hi, I'm Ricardo, but usually known as Lox throughout the internet. I'm from Portugal, and at the moment I'm basically an Ember.js freelancer.
Awesome. And Zane.
I'm Zane. I work over at CVS, big corporate world, so we leech all the open source software. That's where.
And Zane's also a contributor to CoderWall.
Thanks. All right, cool. So we were talking about finding that open source project that you want to contribute to. One of the other things that I've been adding to my projects and started looking for in other projects was like an actual guide contribution to a project. So on GitHub, you can create this contributing.md Markdown file. It'll prompt people when they open a pull request for an issue. Like, did you read this? Make sure you follow these guidelines. And I found that incredibly helpful as well. So that if a project has one of those, then that probably means they've thought more about like that new developer trying to contribute something to their project. Might be more likely to that.
Well, one thing that has come back to me with our projects on assembly and other places is how to get started. Like literally get started. Like how to either start up the app or what dev tools they have to have to be able to work. Just having that stuff all be really clearly laid out in that contributing guideline so that somebody can just look at it and be like, here's my recipe, boom, 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 boom. They don't even have to think about that. They can just get straight to hacking on the thing. So
Yeah.
making it just very clearly defined. This is how it's a web app. This is how you install it. It's a library. This is how you run the tests. All that stuff.
A good example of this is actually Ember.js. They have a really detailed contributing file, and it's very thorough, and it's divided for, like, if you want to work on the documentation, this is the procedure. If you want to work on the actual Ember code, this is the procedure. Here's how you run the code. Here's how you set up all the dependencies. So yeah, it's a very good idea to have that. And to add to Zane's point, one of the best ways, if you want to contribute to a project and like try to get into the community, the IRC channel is probably one of the best ways if it's available, because you'll see what questions usually pop up, and that will give you ideas for documentation or bugs that you need fixing. And you talk to the people and you get to know the maintainers, the users, and slowly, bit by bit, you can help other people, and then you will amass a knowledge of the library and you're able to help out better.
That's something we should talk about too, because we talked about the contributing document, but we haven't talked about what it means to contribute. There are so many ways to contribute to a project. Code is a small part of it. Even something like a really clearly and well-written issue or bug report is incredibly important.
I think that kind of leads into like Sean was asking about, how do you choose a project to help, to join, to contribute to, and kind of one of the key things for me is it's something that I use, something that I have some amount of experience with, something that I'm encountering the bugs and therefore I can file an issue, and that that gets to your point of an issue being something that you can contribute. And then also Ricardo mentioned documentation. I mean, that's sort of cliche, like a cliche entry point into a project, but it's definitely something that's always lacking.
Good documentation, and then moving back to the other points, is going to make it clear how to get started, and it's going to bring even more contributors in. Like, it's just this multiplication effect. I cannot understate the value of good documentation. That's a great way to get started contributing.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was say one thing though that I've been utilizing to try to bring people in is listening for complaints. People are complaining on Twitter or sending a support request or about something that's broken or not working, and sending them back to them and saying, hey, thank you for complaining. A little bit nicer than that, but thank you for letting us know. And then, hey, this is where our repo is. And actually, a kind of a anecdotal kind of fun thing is we have this guy who's just one of those 10-10 programmers who's just come in and just started contributing like crazy. And he told me how he got involved in open source development was literally that he was complaining, kind of grousing about some open source stuff, and then Benjamin Fleischer, a Chicago guy, kind of threw it back at him and said, hey, here's the repo, go fix it if you don't like it. And next thing you know, this guy's got contributions pending in for Rails and working on Sidekick and all that stuff. I mean, a few years go by, but the point was that somebody complained, and then you just kind of throw it back and give them an invitation. Just we're open source. Come check us out. And some people will bite and contribute. Others won't.
It's important to be welcoming, though. A lot of people will say, go fix it yourself. They can be very standoffish. So it's important to, not only suggest that, somebody can fix it on their own, but also encourage them. Hey, not only it's open, you can fix it, but hey, let me help you get started. Here's where you should look. Here's the code you should look for. Let me kind of put you in the right direction, and let me know if you have any questions, or maybe we can pair on this one together, or some way to kind of do a gentle introduction to somebody contributing, because it can be really daunting and it can be read the wrong way. Even if you don't mean it as standoffish, it can just be read that way because that's how the internet works.
Yeah, you have to be very you have to put on your salesperson hat. You have to be like, yeah, no, thank you for telling us. Here's our repo. Thanks, we'd love to have you. Whatever. But so yeah, just opening that conversation instead of being offended by hearing somebody's complaint, just seeing it as an opportunity to reach out to somebody.
This the whole how a community is characterized as far as being very welcoming or very happy to accept outsiders and things like that is kind of an interesting topic, and it speaks to something that I was hoping to bring up, which is especially as a maintainer, but as somebody who's looking to contribute, looking for projects that have a code of conduct. That's something that we've actually, I think Sean's been working on for our open source projects for Groupon. And I think it's something that's going to become, going forward, is going to be much more important and continue to be an important factor in bringing in more people of a much more diverse nature, and essentially showing that you're a welcoming community.
That's an awesome idea. Are there any, have you looked at any? I hadn't even never heard about that as being a thing on projects like.
Yeah. So actually, just yesterday, Coraline, she gave a talk at GeekFest about diversity in open source, and she has an open source contributors code of conduct up on GitHub, I believe.
Sorry to interject, Megan. That's Coraline Imke
yes.
at Bantic on Twitter.
Yes.
For reference. Go ahead.
I just always forget that not everyone might not know who she is because she's so awesome. So, but she talked about how she includes these codes of conduct into her open source projects just to let people know what will and won't be tolerated and how to deal with something if an issue were to arise. I know that for myself, when contributing to open source projects, before I get started, I like to sort of lurk the issues and maybe check out the mailing list to see how people react when things get heated, and see what words and things are thrown around before I decide to contribute my time. So having a code of conduct right up front is a great way to signal that you're have this commitment to making a safe place.
Absolutely, and it's something that we're actually working to get into all of our open source projects at Groupon.
Yeah, I'm actually curious if anybody. Obviously, there are a few people who are involved in Ember.js, and I'm sure that they all have glowing things to say about that community. But outside of that, does anybody have any really positive experience they've had with open source community that they'd be wanting to speak to?
Absolutely. I've been a part of the Clojure community for a number of years now. I wouldn't say right from the beginning, but very close to the beginning of the language. And the community really is a great place to be. Of course, you have, as community grows, every now and again you have, people who speak out and do interesting things, but, they're governed well, and the people, leading the charge are all really great people, very nice, very welcoming, very supportive of other people getting involved and hacking and contributing back. I really like the experience I've had with the Clojure community.
So my open source contributions have been mostly smaller than a huge like language like Clojure, for instance. Most of my contributions have been towards Katrina Owen's project, exorcism.io. I can't say enough good things about that project. Katrina is amazing, and many times she has hopped on Google Hangouts, have a video chat with me if I'm stuck on something, and this is something that she extends to. I see this all the time in the issues when people have, I can't get something to work, and she's like, hey, let's get on Google Hangouts and figure it out. She's a great maintainer, and she really cares about the project a lot. And so I usually hang out in there, check out the issues, and try and fix what I can when it comes up.
If I can jump in, then myself, I don't really do a ton of open source work, but I have this website where I interview people who are doing open source. And one of the things overall that I've observed with open source people is generally an eagerness and a lot of enthusiasm for whatever they're working on, regardless of whether it's somebody who's on the PLT team for Joomla or working on Clojure. But everybody, like when you sit down and start to talk to them about their project, all of a sudden, like whatever their personality is, they open up, and you get to see a lot of positivity. I've not, like I said, over 200 interviews. I've not bumped into really anybody who I'd say was like, wow, what an unpleasant person. Once I really got to talk to them and learn about what they're doing and share it. Obviously, yeah, I mean, even DHH, who is known to be such a abrasive person online, when I watched him at RailsConf, that guy worked the room, and he just talked to everybody and just was super open. Anybody who wanted to talk to him, he tried to be open to them. And then when I finally interviewed him, he was just super gracious and very pleasant. So I think overall, there's always going to be bad apples in any community, but overall, people in the open source community are really trying to do their best, and even if they make faux pas or do dumb things, either saying kind of inappropriate things, generally I think they mean well and are open to they want to try to make things better is what they're trying to do, and yeah, so.
I think it's important to kind of, when someone does make a misstep, to communicate with them in a positive way and explain to them what happened. This is something kind of, not call anyone out, but like over the last weekend, we had another contributor that me and Mike were working with approach a problem and maybe not the best way. And Mike kind of just, over chat sat him down, if you, so to speak, and kind of like, there's a better way we can approach this problem of communication, which is arguably one of the hardest problems in all of humanity. And from there, it was a learning and growing experience. And like that's how we make people better, as opposed to like, oh, that guy's a jerk, and then you just completely discard him. Well, now he's a jerk, but now he's a bitter jerk, and it's not helping anyone.
Yeah, and in that case, it was able to work through a problem by just talking and having a long conversation, because the person was obviously a positive contributor, but they were a little bit abrasive, and we didn't want to lose their talent, but at the same time didn't want to poison the pot either. So we were able to work it out. Like as they say in most things, just apply more talking. If things aren't going well, just keep talking. It's better than fighting.
Yeah, definitely. Dealing with feedback is always going to be difficult, because I'm sure a lot of people who are approaching open source are afraid of someone dismissing their pull requests or the issue that they've created. I think some of these techniques will help you identify the projects where that's less likely to happen. But going back to an earlier point about just hopping in IRC and getting a feel for the community, and even talking to the maintainers and asking like, oh, would you like it if I fix this bug I found, or refactored this code. And then you get that agreement up front. You haven't spent this time in fear rejection.
You actually, Sean had a really interesting talk that he gave at Dev Bootcamp recently here in Chicago that I had the opportunity to review before he gave it about going the extra mile, and this was that's kind of an example of going the extra mile versus what your alternative was, which you were saying is more is a better thing to do and possibly results in a better experience, is to go the extra step. So not so far as going the extra mile. Don't go overboard and do a whole bunch of extra work before somebody has the chance to actually review and figure out what it is you're doing. And I think that applies in this situation. Like, before going ahead and writing code and submitting a pull request, it's really great to start that conversation, figure out if this is something that's within the roadmap for the project, because I mean, let's be realistic. Everybody who started a project and is going down a certain path has a vision for where they're going, or at least you imagine they likely do, and your pull request might take the project into a totally different path that is not foreseen, and will cause some friction. So getting that kind of buy-in to start the process is a really great way to start that conversation and get your code ultimately accepted into the system.
Yeah, and that's something that you should address in your contributing document as well. It's great to lay out, not only the technical expectations of contributions and code of conduct, but also pull requests get merged, and don't be discouraged. And also, not all pull requests get merged on their first try. Pull request is the beginning of a conversation. It's not the end of one. It's a suggestion for an improvement, and it's taking something forward, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the conversation has to stop when the code's committed. And a lot of people are contributed, and a lot of people will actually get upset or be offended by somebody not accepting a pull request or critiquing the code that was submitted and asking them for additional improvements, or maybe another test here or some formatting there, to make sure that it conforms with the project itself. But that's not necessarily in and of itself bad, but it's nice to be clear up front to say, hey, look, not all pull requests get accepted right off the bat. Don't get discouraged. Let's have the conversation. And just be upfront and very clear about, a rejection isn't a rejection. It's just a continuing of a conversation.
Absolutely, and I think it's there is, for a lot of people, there's a long way to go as far as learning the finer points of critique and actually delivering critique that is not too biting and hopefully doesn't drive people away, because in a lot of cases, that initial pull request with a new contributor is your chance to make a first impression on how your community is going to react, because not everybody's going to go so far as to investigate the IRC channel and all those things that we've been discussing. I think those are great options for somebody who's new to enter into a project, but not everybody's going to have listened to this podcast, unfortunately. So I guess all that said, hopefully we can have a little bit of better banter without having so biting criticism all the time.
And to sort of piggyback off of that, I've submitted pull requests to projects that weren't accepted, and I didn't expect them to get accepted, but I figured if I had a problem that I could solve with some piece of code, like I was using a Clojure Vim plugin, and this was for a certain use case, I didn't think it would get merged into the code base, into master, but maybe somebody else would come along and be like, oh, this is a fork with this code that does what I need it to do, and I've used other people's forks, even if they haven't been merged in, just because it's something useful that I wanted to do. So I think there's value in just submitting a pull request, even if you don't expect it to get merged in. Just make that known, I guess, in the comments.
We've had on CodaWall a few people contribute where even though I accepted the pull request, I completely rewrote the contents of it. Partially, one was because they put us on a trajectory that I wanted to go on and pursue. So it gave me an excuse to follow through on that pull request, because the goal isn't just to get that functionality in for us, it's also to get somebody who wants to become part of the community and encourage them to stay. And then we talked about it, and then they can see kind of the end result of the ball they started rolling. Finally getting into production. And then we talked about, okay, your configuration was more for if you're running a daemon, we were running in Heroku. It's just basically I was able to pull them in, keep talking, keep sharing and collaborating with them instead of just saying, oh no, we're not running a standalone server, we're on Heroku, so this configuration isn't going to work. Kick them back and then potentially lose them as a contributor. In another case, we received a pull request that stylistically wasn't really up to snuff, but again, it was an 80-20 kind of solution, and it was just I can either reject them, or I can just take that last little bit, clean it up, get it in, give them some feedback, and then they'll contribute again, and they'll know a little bit better about what the expectation is.
So one of the worst things that you can do as a maintainer isn't to like shut down a pull request, is to actually do nothing. I've seen this on a lot of projects. There's like a ton of open pull requests without a single comment from the maintainers. This is really harmful because the users start getting the idea that the maintainer doesn't care, and the maintainer can have valid reasons for like people. I think maintainers are too afraid to shut down issues and pull requests. I've actually been more and more proactive. Like I'll shut down an issue if I think it's resolved, but I'll comment, okay, if this problem still persists, let me know and we'll reopen this. But yeah, don't be afraid to shut down pull requests, but don't like just close the pull requests without saying anything. Say, okay, so the reason I'm not accepting this is because it's not the vision I have for this project, or if maybe you can change this and that. Like we were saying before, help the person along the way, but yeah, don't be afraid to do that. It's better than not replying. I'm the current maintainer for Mustache, and we had like 4-year-old pull requests that was just a simple merge, and people were like, "Oh my God, you came back from the dead to merge this."
There's an interesting flip side to that, though, also as a submitter, of like dropping a pull request as a bomb and then just running away. And when the maintainer starts asking questions and is considering merging the thing, and you're nowhere to be found to actually back up why your code's important, why this change was important, etc.
Yeah, that's one of the cases when I'm more and more proactive. I'll put up a notice and I'll say, okay, you have 2 weeks, or otherwise I'm closing this issue, and I'll put a reminder in the calendar and then deal with that.
So Megan broached an interesting topic, I think, which was forking a project and keeping that fork open with your changes that aren't expected to get merged. I know at one point, and this was pre-GitHub, that forking a project was somewhat frowned upon, and the idea of, oh no, now we're going to have these 2 forked branches of this project, and they're going to diverge, and we're not going to be able to merge upstream. And I know there are probably countless examples of that actually happening, but with now that we're in a post GitHub era, is forking permanently still frowned upon? Is that something, as as somebody who's looking to get into open source, is that a valid approach? Is to say, this project does most, like 90% of what I want, and I want to fork it and make it do the last 10%.
I think it's still kind of looked on a little negatively, but I think we should actively try to change that. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head where a fork has outgrown what it's forked, but I know that that example, just out of sheer odds, has to exist out there. And it's, sometimes you go in a different direction that the original project didn't foresee or want to do. And the ability to just fork it and reinvent it and make it its own thing, you should totally be empowered to do it. Because in the day, the community is a duocracy. It's about, those who do. And sometimes, if you go in PR and different, vision, you can go off and do your own fork, and you can be like, yeah, you can secretly hide away in your open source cave and be like, my version's better because I spent all the time on this feature. And like, find that drive, find, that drive to make it your own and make it awesome in its own way. Because at the end of the day, it's still contributing to the community at large. It's going to be helpful for somebody else. That's ultimately what I think we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I think. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to comment that I actually look at the forks of my projects pretty regularly just to see what people are doing. People sometimes fork and don't always even submit a pull request back. And I'll find some forks and actually encourage people and say, hey, I would love to have this in my version as well. Would you mind submitting a pull request? And sometimes that invitation to collaborate is all somebody needs to get started. They might just, have never even thought about it or were too shy to contribute back, but wanted that thing to happen. It's nice to have those forks. I love looking through them because people do some really awesome stuff. Everybody has their own way of looking at things and thinking about things and also their own needs. It's great to see, just different use cases.
I think the reason why forks are not seen in a very positive light is the situations where they usually arise. So, for example, an unmaintained project and someone forks and tries to update it, but then someone else also forks and tries to update it. And then those forks usually don't have the steam to carry it through. So you end up with a lot of fragmentation and not the different forks don't have enough differentiating factors to justify the existence of them. Yeah, but I agree. Forks should be something. We should figure out how to make forks work better for the open source community.
Absolutely, especially because I think GitHub kind of changed the definition of fork for most people to essentially just mean this is my copy. I'm not planning on doing anything different, but the copy was cheap. On kind of another way to take those kinds of things, as far as a project that doesn't seem like it's alive, does anybody have any experience in trying to revive an existing open source project? For example, I actually have a friend who took over Trevor Burnham's Connect assets because it was in a state like you were mentioning before, Ricardo, where there were pull requests that had been open for 4 years, or not 4 years, but at least a year, 6 months, at least, something like that. And people were starting to ask the question, is this project still alive? There haven't been any commits for X number of days. What's going on? So my friend submitted a pull request, said, please transfer ownership to me. And Trevor responded to that one. So luckily the project is still alive.
I did something like that with load port scanning. The maintainer, I submitted a pull request because I wanted some extra small feature that it didn't provide. And the maintainer was like, I don't really want to manage this anymore. Do you want to manage it? I'm like, oh, sure. So now I'm the maintainer of that project. and it doesn't get a lot of activity, so it's really not a lot of work for me, but it was just nice that instead of going dead or trying to convince everyone to use a fork, and there's no real great way to like deprecate one version for another. I guess you could add it to the README or something, but it was just kind of nice that that could keep living.
Yeah, I actually had a similar experience many years ago with Archive, the Ruby code coverage tool for the 1.8 version of Ruby. The original maintainer kind of disappeared, and this was when GitHub was just getting started as well. And there was an old Darks repo that Archive was held in, and at one point, one of the versions of Rails, I think 2.0 or 2.1, something bad happened, and basically everything stopped working. And a coworker of mine, Chad Humphreys, Spicy Code on GitHub, who actually works at GitHub now. Him and I took a look at things and actually did a lot of work on the project together. But resurrecting that and moving it forward was actually quite helpful. And thankfully, it doesn't need to exist anymore because the coverage module in 1.9 and SimpleCov exists now. But it was great to be able to resurrect it and keep it going.
So this is kind of a problem I've been toying with in my head, is kind of the idea that sometimes a project happens and people want to use it. And kind of the example I can think of is Ryan Bates's CanCan library. It's a simple, simple kind of user auth thing. And he's kind of gone from the world, taking a break from Rails and Railscast and everything. So like now there's CanCan. And it's kind of the successor to it. But kind of the idea, is there a way that we could take projects and have them be managed by, a loose consortium in a way that like we can just say this project is open source and it's currently controlled by this one person, but should that person like disappear or whatever, you can make a kind of a distributed way to like transfer ownership or transfer control.
I'm going to make a really horrible analogy because I honestly have no Doctor Who experience. But it's kind of like the Doctor regenerating, right?
I'll allow it.
So GitHub, what's the name? GitHub orgs, GitHub organizations are actually not a great way, but a good way to enable this. So I had been pestering defunct for the last 2 years to do something about the Mustache Ruby library, and he finally moved the Mustache repo into the Mustache organization, and that way, like, I can distribute and give admin rights to different people. And yeah, I think nowadays it's easier to pass on the project to someone else. In Ruby Gems, you can just with a single command, you can add another person with push privileges. I think NPM also does that. Yeah, so it's getting easier and easier to hand off the projects.
I was going to say about, and people passing away too. I mean, we recently lost Jim Weirich, and I haven't followed. It hadn't occurred to me, but who's picking up his projects? How is that being handled? Is anybody familiar with what's going on with his work?
It's interesting. I'm not super familiar. I'm not close to any of that, but just following some of it along on Twitter. And I have no idea how the process is working. I'm sure, the people at GitHub are fairly, empathetic towards the situation. But I realized that I think Justin Searles recently took over one of his projects. I want to say RSpec Given, but I'm probably wrong.
I think that was it.
And then certainly somebody's taken over Rake. So yeah, that is a really interesting question given, the age of some developers now.
Well, and also just things happened. There's a very nice sitemap generator that the developer who first created that for Rails passed away, and then there was somebody created a fork of it, and everybody's been pushing people to the fork because they kept the old one. There was an update to the README saying This was created by, I don't remember the person's name, and they've passed away at this age, and they left it as kind of a memoriam. And they said, if you are interested in this up to date, the fork to go check out is this other fork, and that's who's maintaining it now. I mean, I don't know if you have to have a consortium.
Yeah, it's important for any of your open source projects to add at least one other person as a maintainer, even if you don't expect them to do anything day to day, just so that there's always that backup, not necessarily in case you die, but that as well. But even if like you just don't care about that project anymore, that other person still does, or you're just on vacation for 4 weeks, and it'd be nice if someone else was just keeping an eye on what was going on and answering questions at least while you're gone.
We could probably have a whole episode on like the concept of digital will and what happens to your private keys when you die.
Yeah, in the case of Team Weirich, it was, I mean, so well connected in the Ruby community that, for example, the gem ownership, Evan Phoenix and everyone else can just, okay, we know you, we knew Jim, you can have access to this gem, no problem. But if it's someone that's unknown or doesn't have that many connections, it can be tricky.
So not to like pitch an open source project or anything, but as a community, as we mature, should we maybe have like a wall of stars sort of thing for, those of us who have passed, that have contributed great things to our community?
That's what Coderwall is.
It's hard to say, like, who maintain that over time. Where would that go?
But that's back to the same problem.
Yeah.
Circle.
Well, Mike Perham was, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, from the creator of Sidekick, was kind of lamenting this on Twitter a few days ago, and that's why he created a website to promote the people who contribute to his own project. Because one of the few currencies we have, aside from just the I'm passionate, I like to code, but we're also trying to pay bills, feed our families, pay for our medical insurance, and all that stuff with our skills too. So you contribute, you do good stuff, you should get promoted. I mean, that's kind of also why I am passionate about Utastic, about promoting people who are doing this stuff. But basically, getting back to Mike, he created a website for his core contributors to help promote them and say, hey, these are the people that make Sidekick possible. You use Sidekick, these people are why you're able to use it, and because he understands that the currency of our community is what you're doing and being aware and making people aware of what you're doing. Instead of it just being, oh, you did a bunch of contributions and a few people know who you are, but and that's all that matters. No, you kind of gotta toot your own horn a little bit, or get a little bit of help tooting the horns of people who help you.
Yeah, I think that's valid even at a micro level. If I come across an issue that inspires me to create a pull request, I will CC the person who came up with the issue and thank them for like bringing it up so that I could work on it and submit a pull request. So it's good to like just incentivize, even at a small level of just creating issues on an open source project all the way up to, core contributors.
Yeah, and some projects will have that just straight in the just a list of people who have contributed to the project, which is also nice.
Well, and also the human.
At every release, every announcement has a list of all the people who have contributed, not even to this release, but in entirety. Here are the people who have contributed to the language. There's always mentions of people who help out. That's really great.
Yeah, and there's also the humans text. Yeah, or the they say you have the README or the robots.txt. we need to have a humans.txt. There's a project, I have to go look for it, but that's it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's basically your little all the people who contributed to your project, what open source projects you're using, all those things. I'll link to it in it's called.
Yeah, I think those are great, and maybe a future topic will actually be this idea of digital will, which I think is really interesting as well. But I do want to get back to finding these open source projects and contributing to them. There are tools that will help you do this. So one of the things that would be great is if you want to contribute to something that you use, that's awesome. But maybe that's not particularly interesting to you. You just want to look for something else. There are tools that will help you find something to contribute to. One of them that I found recently that I thought was really interesting is called "What Can I Do for Mozilla?" And this is obviously specific to Mozilla projects, but you just go to the site and then it just has this like one-word term for your area of expertise, and you just say, "I don't care about that. Why do I care about that?" And if you say no, it shows you another random thing. And if you say yes, then it gives you like the more detailed information. Once you get through some prompts of like what projects you contribute to, how you do that, stuff like that. And there's also this other one called Open Hatch, which is a little bit more general, that tries to match these people who want to contribute something with the projects that need contributions.
Yeah, I recently found a similar site in researching for this this Hangout called upforgrabs.net. I think it's probably very similar to OpenHatch. It looks like most of the projects link back into GitHub, and the majority of them appear to be .NET oriented. So if that's your favorite flavor of development, then it seems to be pretty targeted to you. Though there are a few other platforms in here as well.
And there's also a site called Bounty Source that people offer rewards for closing certain pull requests or certain bugs. That could be also interesting for some people.
And I think.
And Bounty Source.
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Bounty Source is especially interesting there because people can contribute money to fixing specific bugs. So whoever fixes it gets that money.
That's actually really fascinating. I'm really interested. I guess we're going to be talking about funding your open source work next week, but that's something interesting to bring back. More generally, there's a sort of a trend, and I don't know if it's caught on very widely, but of a trend of adding issue tags to any issues that are deemed, relatively trivial or low-hanging fruit, where the tag might be indeed low-hanging fruit. I'm sure there are probably a couple of other standards floating around, because we need as many standards as possible.
Yeah, I really like when maintainers take advantage of adding tags to issues. Some of the ones in Exorcism that she has a beginner-friendly tag, lower barrier, documentation. Those sorts of tags can be great for somebody who wants to jump in for the first time and doesn't know where to start.
One project where I've seen the beginner-friendly tag is Ghosts, the blogging platform. I think they use that one and a couple of others like cosmetic for CSS stuff that would suit more a designer, for example.
Yeah, Ricardo, that's very interesting. Actually, trying to bring in people who aren't necessarily even just devs and making it easy for them to contribute is a fascinating topic as well.
You actually went in the direction. As soon as you said that, Ricardo, I was thinking that exact thing. Like that that's a nut that I've been having trouble cracking myself.
Yeah, I've had a lot of trouble getting designers to contribute to Mustache because it really needs a redesign, and more it's a very important aspect of a project. And it's not that they're not out there, is that uh, some people have shown interest, and then after a couple of emails, I don't get a response back. But as we could see with Artbleed, design is really important. Having a brand, like something easily recognizable, is very important.
Yeah, and actually getting people with that design skill set into open source contributions might be a future topic in Open Source Hangout. We also want to talk about, in a future topic, doing the same for other skills that people
Yeah, copywriting,
editorial, yeah. Even lawyers, getting lawyers involved, not just with licensing, but issues like that. It's definitely something that we need help with because we're not doing a great job of it, like as an open source community right now.
Yes, and it not only protects you, but also your users of your projects, and is something that is super, super important. And if it really is truly an open source project, there are even some places, general counsel, legal support that's free for open source communities and open source projects to get advice and to make sure that you're getting the kind of protection for you and your users that you deserve.
Yeah, so those topics we'll cover in future shows. One of the things that Aaron, you brought up when we were talking about this before was this idea of the refacts totem. Can you tell people what that is? I thought that was really awesome.
This is something that we used to do at conferences back when I worked at Relevant, who is now called Cognitect. But we did this at RailsConf for a number of years and a few other different conferences. But essentially, it was a kind of a half-day, sometimes all-day workshop where we would grab people who were interested in contributing to open source software that either haven't before or wanted to kind of learn more. And we'd spend maybe an hour or so, hour and a half, talking about different ways you can contribute, showing some examples, things like documentation, code coverage, looking through issues. Some of this was before GitHub, so it was different outlets as well. But it was definitely geared towards helping people figure out what a contribution really is, what a meaningful contribution is, and that it's other than source code sometimes. And we would then actually take a look through and help people get started. And the explicit goal of the workshop was to spend the time contributing to your first open source, thing, right? Whatever it is. And so we usually got about 50% of the people who would have a, pull request or patch issued to the maintainers of a project by the end of the time. And that was really, really great. And lots and lots of fun. So I really enjoyed doing that when we did, and I wish we'd do it more often, actually. I think we stopped doing it at one point, but I would love to do more of that at conferences. I think every conference should have a side track where, that's just a thing, and people that contribute to the the main project could be around to help out. I mean, even if RailsConf had a contributing room where people could come in and hack, and you had people from the core team staffing it, that'd be great. Things like EmberConf, same thing. All of it, right? Every major open source platform conference should be able to have that kind of area where people can come and contribute and try new things.
That's really interesting because I mean I think about it. Windy City Rails a few years ago they did a like this dojo kind of concept where they had a bunch of people come in and hack on a like a bot for a chat, and the chat was live and people were in the conference and making changes, and then you'd see people introduce bugs or introduce new things, and then people would start talking about that new feature that just got hacked in by so and so. So they were like talking on Twitter about what was going on in the chat room, and then it was kind of building a lot of buzz. But the problem was is that it wasn't really anything you'd walk away from with a contribution outside of, oh, that was kind of fun. Whereas like what you're talking about sounds like you were like going to make a contribution and be part of Rails, by the end of the conference. So it was meaningful for the contributor.
I really like the idea of this, and it would be great if we can get more conferences to offer something like that. But I also wonder if that's something that we can do here. We could have a hangout where some members of a core team of a project, and we could do different projects each time, would be around to help the people watching that stream and interacting in that chat room get started actually hacking in that project. And I think that would be pretty awesome. I think, Mike, didn't you do something sort of similar for Coder Wallet a couple weeks ago?
We haven't actually done a live event yet. We do. Well, actually, are you talking about the fireside chats? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We're planning on doing interactive events where people come out and hack. But no, what I do is every week we have a call, and it's an open Hangouts, and we record it for everybody who's contributing to hop on a call and just talk about what we did this week. What was, it's kind of like a retro almost. Just what did we do this week? What was fun? What was cool? Some cool stuff that happened on the Coder Wall or assembly, or where are we with our coins? Because we have a we don't we do have a financial model where contributions earn ownership into CoderWall, and that's through these things called coins, which are values we put on different bounties. So instead of a bounty being worth $50, it's worth 500 coins, and what that represents is you get 500 points of ownership inside of CoderWall that's paid out every month and for the life of the product. And we just get together and talk and give everybody a chance to be heard, even though we're all working remotely and through chat. So
yeah, that's a great thing that project maintainers and core teams can do. I know that the Ember team will at least have recorded minutes from their core team meetings, which I also really like because you get some insight into what types of things they're discussing and what their plans are, more than just reading the review of the project or trying to infer that from issue comments and stuff like that. So I really like when projects do that, and if you're part of a big project, it definitely be useful to think about doing some things like that. So, I think we should start to wrap this up. I do want to come back to, as a new dev, I just wanted to remind new open source developers who want to get into this that there are more things, we've said it a couple of times, but there are more things than just code that you can contribute. And one of the ways I like to visualize that is the open source report code that a lot of people are probably familiar with. It's a way of giving your GitHub username, and it will provide you with this nice prose and charts, a breakdown of your contributions. And as a new developer, obviously, you're not going to have anything in here, but I like it because once you get into it a little bit, you're still most rewarded for doing things beyond just code, because it'll count things like comments and actually submitting pull requests and commits as well. But it goes beyond just that, and also profiles what languages you use. I'm a little torn about it because I don't want people to think that this is like somehow judging that person's worth. But it is nice if you do it like only in a positive light, like, oh, it's a breakdown of the things that I've been doing and make you feel good about it, as opposed to, oh, I haven't been committing every day, I feel bad about that. But
Yeah, I really like now when you go to open source report card, there's like this prominent message that gets displayed, and it's like, don't forget, GitHub's not your CV. These stats are biased and one-sided only. It's just a toy. Don't take it too seriously. So it's nice that they're also recognizing that as well.
yeah, for sure. why don't we just go down the line one more time to give any closing thoughts before we head out? Let's start with Aaron.
I guess for me, a big part of my career, or probably the biggest part of my career, has been open source. It's what got me to where I am now. It's what continues to fuel my career. There's a lot to be said about community collaboration and just meeting great people on the way. And I don't think I would be as involved or passionate about software. Actually, I'm positive I wouldn't be as involved or passionate about software if it hadn't been for open source communities and other people who want to share and contribute. And so that single kind of thing is probably what's brought the most meaning to my career in software.
That's great. Dusty?
I guess my closing would just be, feel free to push crappy code. I mean, that's get involved regardless of how well you think you'll do, and you'll be surprised at what you can do. Whether that is contributing to something that already exists or just pushing your own projects, whatever it is, it's an enjoyable experience.
Thanks, Megan.
Okay. I think my biggest takeaway from starting to get more involved in the open source community and putting my code out there, which can be a scary thing, is a quote that I like to reference pretty frequently from Adventure Time, and sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something. And I like to, I think that's very true. I like to live by that.
I think that's great. Mike?
Again, that code isn't the only thing that makes open source. I come at open source not because of being a great coder, but because I just like talking to people and I like programming. And it's okay to find other ways to be valuable. Like I go through Utastic and I try to promote people, and the people that sometimes are the most useful for me with CoderWall are those that come in and do some PMing and some of the administrative work. So there's other ways you can do it without being an uber coder. So don't worry about it. If you can help just shuffle some papers, that would be amazing too.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
I'll end with my favorite why quote. When you don't create things, you become defined by your tastes rather than ability. Your tastes only narrow and exclude people, so create. That's it.
Insane.
I think the biggest thing to take away is that it's a community. Find something you're passionate about, something that you can be, in a vacuum, will still drive you, and then figure out how to share that awesomeness with other people, and that, will help it all come together.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I just want to make sure that people can feel comfortable contributing to open source. If anyone ever wants to try one of my projects, or I'm sure anyone else here, we're all very open to new users, I'm sure, and we'll be more than happy to help you with whatever you guys want to contribute and work with you as opposed to shutting you down or blowing you off in some way. And I think that's just about it for this episode of the Open Source Hangouts. Just a reminder, we stream this live every week on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Central Time. Today, Google Hangouts on Air had something to say about that, so we're only recording and publishing it. But in the future, that should be the case. You can join the IRC chat room. It's on free mode. The room is Open Source Hangout. And opensourcehangout.com will always redirect you to a list of all the shows, including the next upcoming. And definitely send us feedback on the show, what you'd like to see in the future. And always let me know if you want to be on air in future episodes as well. It's always great to get a bunch of different people on to talk about these topics. Next week, we're going to be talking about open source funding models and the different ways that can happen. So it can be really cool. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.